Well, hello everyone. This is John Byrne with Poets and Quants. Welcome to our Meet the Faculty series at the Gies College of Business at the University of Illinois. We have with us today David Molitor, who is an associate professor at the Gies College. He leads the school's healthcare research initiative, which brings together all of the school's health researchers. He's particularly doing a lot of work on environmental effects on the economy, including some new research on the impact of wildfire smoke on health outcomes and mortality, which is quite a topical subject today, given the wildfires in Los Angeles. David, welcome.
Thank you.
So, David, what inspired you to become an academic in the first place?
John, I don't know that I was really inspired to become an academic. It kind of grew on me, and I think probably a lot of people would be surprised. I'm surprised that I ended up here. So I grew up in Minnesota in a small suburb of the Twin Cities, Lauderdale. Uh, Me and my 7 siblings, so 8 kids,
Big
parents,
family.
10 of us living in a 900 square foot house with
Wow.
a single bathroom, so it was tight, and we were all homeschooled. So I think there was a lot of noise coming out of our home. It was just crazy, and there were a lot of people when I was young, that made comments along the lines of, well, someday when you go to real school, it'll be a shock. And so I wasn't ever very confident that I could do well at school or in academics. When I applied for colleges, that kind of fear was a little bit reinforced. I had high aspirations, so I applied to all the Ivy Leagues. I applied everywhere. I also applied to a number of liberal arts schools in Minnesota, the University of Minnesota, and I was rejected by everywhere, including the University of Minnesota. But to my great fortune, there was an admissions officer that saw my application in the rejection pile and gave me a call. And after our conversation, that decision had been overturned. So I got very fortunate, kind of got into the University of Minnesota. And one of the very first things that I wanted to do was to do some research. And uh, I think I'm not even sure why. I don't come from an academic family. And so part of this was just ignorance. I thought, oh, research sounds fun. And and so I was very fortunate to when I started as an undergrad freshman, I went to the undergrad research office and said I'd like to do research, and they said, well, come back to us when you're a junior. And I didn't like that answer, so I started knocking on doors of faculty to see if I could get something. And I started out doing some physics research. Being down in a basement by myself wasn't particularly enticing. And so through a few different tries at different things, basically failing is a really nice thing. You learn what you don't like so you can pivot to something you do. I ended up
Mm.
working as a research assistant for an economics faculty member, Tom Holmes, at the University of Minnesota. He worked in industrial organization, which is kind of the study of how industries are organized and incentives, how they set prices, how they compete. And I was hooked. And he was the one that said, maybe you should think about getting a PhD in economics. Well, here I had just come from, I'm thinking, everywhere I apply, I seem to get rejected. But I gave it a shot. I applied to all the top PhD programs in economics, and I got accepted into the program that was just a dream, which was MIT. And I thought, well, I got in, might as well try it. I still at that time I didn't know a lot about economics. I was very naive. All of these, Nobel laureates in economics were there, and I didn't know most of their names at the time. But that was the start. So I think what happened along the way is I was just my attitude toward this was I was doing this stuff because I loved it, and I didn't really have a lot of foresight at the time for where it would lead, or what I'd be doing down the road. But I loved every step of the way, and now looking back, I feel so incredibly lucky by various folks who kind of suggested the path to me that got me here. So that's kind of my story.
Yeah, it's a remarkable story, really, from being homeschooled with a lot of siblings in a tiny place to getting a PhD from MIT and now being a professor at Gies.
Yeah,
That's
my family has a bit of history here at the University of Illinois.
oh,
My grandfather was here back in the 1940s. He did architecture before he went, served in World War II, and settled in Minnesota. So in some ways, it's a bit of a homecoming. He studied, just across the street from where I'm now a professor. So that's kind of a special tie as well.
wow. So now you head up the healthcare research group, and I wonder, why you chose to focus on healthcare and the environmental effects of that impact the economy. Why that field of study?
John, when I was in grad school, there was a lecture one of the faculty was giving where they put up a map of the United States showing how much the Medicare program, so that's the government health insurance for primarily for people 65 and older, how much does Medicare spend per beneficiary, and how does that amount differ in different parts of the country?
Mm,
And it turns out that the amounts are strikingly different. Some parts, sometimes as much as twofold differences in how much they spend. Now that kind of leads to questions about why. Why are they spending so much? And people have studied this question. It turns out that it's not readily explained by differences in illness severity. That's a little bit of it. A lot of it appears to be explained by what doctors, like the doctor that you see, or even just where you live, plays a big role. So I became very interested in trying to understand uh, why does place, like how much does place play a role in shaping our
mm,
health outcomes and the way that healthcare is practiced. And so that really became kind of a guiding focus area for me in grad school and has persisted. So the my work on studying how the environment, and by the environment, you can think about the physical environment, things like disasters or extremely hot or cold days, or air pollution. Those are all things I've studied, along with, in most cases, with my colleagues also here at Gies College of Business. Uh, that's one way in which, of course, the environment can shape our health. I've also done work thinking about other aspects of the environment, like your work environment. How does the workplace and your employer, what role do they play in shaping health and well-being? So that's been kind of the overarching principle of my
mm.
research, is how does place shape your health?
What did you find in your study of Medicare expenditures?
Well, when I started out, I think I had this idea that maybe a lot of the differences in health that you see across places comes from what I'll call a selection effect. You go out, if you've ever visited the mountains out west in the United States, and you see everybody looks super fit, and they're all out hiking and skiing and mountain biking and swimming. Um, seem very healthy, but maybe that's just because people who are already healthy kind of select into those areas. And then there's places that are known for their food. People select there to eat well. They might take on a different physique as a result. So these that would be just a sorting. People just move to places, and then they kind of birds of a feather, kind of gathering together. But maybe the place isn't actually changing their outcome. They're just seeking those places out. So so I kind of went into this thinking that could explain a lot of it. And I think what I found is there is a little bit of that, but actually place seems to play a very big role. So some of my
Mm,
studies have used data that allow you to look at individuals and their health outcomes and follow them over time, over like decades, even as they move. And so what you can do is you can say, if somebody moves from an area that has relatively low mortality rates, and then they're moving to a place that has relatively high mortality rates, how does their own health experience kind of conform to the place where they move? And did they already look healthy to begin with when they moved to the healthy place, or did they already look unhealthy when they moved to an unhealthy place? And it turns out that you see, uh, in many cases, very sharp changes in people's health, even for people who are later in life, when you think a lot of this might be already baked in. You see that people's health is very responsive to the places where they live.
Interesting. Wow. Now, we are undergoing a great tragedy in LA. There are wildfires that have been out of control for over a
Mm.
week, damaging a really large part of the city. And I know that you have looked into the consequences of wildfires on health and mortality. What have you found?
Yeah, wildfires seem to be, in the news maybe at an increasing rate over recent years, with the fires in Los Angeles just being kind of the most recent and very big tragedy, even on the scale of the wildfire disasters we've had in recent years. So very, very big. The research that I have done with colleagues here at Gies and others looked not at the direct effects of the fire. So, of course, there's the communities that are impacted by the burns. What we've been interested in is the smoke that these fires produce. It turns out that fires produce, lots of smoke. And the thing about the smoke is that it can drift based on wind patterns for hundreds, even thousands of miles. We saw this a couple of summers ago when fires that were burning up in Canada, the smoke was reaching the east coast of the United States, the Midwest. And it turns out that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, they have satellites that are tracking
Hmm.
at a daily level the location of smoke plumes. In fact, you can go to the EPA's wildfire smoke map, and they'll show you in near real time the location of wildfire smoke plumes of the United States. We took that data and we asked, which parts of the country get exposure to the most smoke? And it turns out that the geography of smoke is very different from the geography of wildfires. You think of the wildfires as primarily something burning out in California, the Pacific Northwest, Canada, the Southeast.
Right.
But the geography of smoke is very different. The Midwest gets the most days of smoke on average uh,
Hmm.
in a typical year. It's about in Illinois, which is I'm in central Illinois, we get about 40, a little over 40 days of smoke per year, which is kind of, I think, more days of smoke coverage than people would realize. Not all of that is super thick. The reason the Midwest gets so much smoke is not because the fires are close to us. It's because fires out in California, the winds tend to blow to the east. Um, Fires up in Canada, the wind tends to blow south. And occasionally we even get the smoke that's from Mexico and Central America blowing north. So that was like the first part is just
Wow.
where does the smoke go? And then the second part was what are the health impacts? And that's where I think this is a strength of Gies College of Business. We have a lot of data oriented researchers where we like to take huge data sets, take satellite data on smoke plumes. And then what we've done is we've matched that up to data that come from the Medicare program. So you have about 50 million people over decades of time. You observe very precisely where they live and their precise health outcomes. Are they going to the emergency room and what for? Do they die? And you link all of that together and you see in the data things that would be a little bit hard to observe from small anecdotes because mortality outcomes are somewhat rare events. But in the data where you have all of this linked together, you see these very clear pictures of exactly what happens when a smoke plume arrives on a given day. You can see how health outcomes like going to the ER or mortality look pretty typical in a place in the days leading up to a smoke event. The smoke plume arrives, the satellite measures, okay, the smoke showed up today, and you see an immediate increase in emergency room visits that
Hmm.
that peaks on that day and then starts to go back down in the following days. And mortality goes up, although it takes about a day or two for that to be realized. And that allows us to just add up how many extra deaths, how many extra ER visits come because of the smoke. And, with these big wildfires, sometimes we talk about, maybe there's 10 or 15 people dying from the fires themselves, huge losses to infrastructure and buildings.
Yeah.
But actually, most of the health impacts are not from the fire burns. Every year, and this is just among the population 65 and older, in a typical year in the United States, this is measuring over the past 15 years, it's about 10,000 excess deaths because of wildfire smoke. So it's a very large health burden. It's spread out over the whole U.S., so it's not quite as stark as everything being concentrated in one city, but
Sure.
it's a real impact.
Yeah. Wow. Well, when you think about your area of focus in the future, is there something that excites you most that you want to really dig into?
Well, there are so many things. So what excites me most is a challenge. Let me tell you about one of the things that excites me a lot and where I really see. I think this also just ties into, being a professor in a business school. What are some of the comparative advantages that I have or people in similar positions have? And that is doing research that involves collaborations with other organizations. So I've been
Mm.
talking about some of my environmental work, but I alluded to earlier how one part of the environment are the places we live and we work and how that shapes health outcomes. And when I first came to the University of Illinois, I I worked with the university to roll out an employee workplace wellness program. These are the types of programs that try to help people get healthier by being more active or taking better care of their health. And what we did is we rolled out, so there's about 12,000 employees at the University of Illinois. We Working with those employees, we randomly assigned them to either be eligible for this new program or be ineligible. So it was like a randomized controlled trial. And for the people in the treatment group who were eligible for this comprehensive program, we ran that program for 2 years. And then again, this gets back to all the data analytics. We had data from the major health insurer for the university. We had all the HR data on who stayed at the firm and who left. We had survey data on employees for how they were feeling and do they want to get in shape. We had gym attendance from card swipes of all the employees. And we
Oh, that's
matched
funny.
that all up to whether you were in the treatment group or the control group. And we had a lot of, I think, just fascinating results about the ways in which these programs do and in many ways don't work the way many people tout the programs to work. So that is an area, the main lesson I learned from that is the huge value that comes when researchers partner up with an organization that has a problem they want to solve, and you work together to provide rigorous evidence about what works, what doesn't work, and why, and how do we move forward. And so that's something that I see huge value in, and would love to do more.
Of course, research is obviously a very important part of your job and takes a good amount of your time. But then there's the teaching part. I wonder what you like most about teaching business students at Gies.
Well, I'm very fortunate that I get to teach data analytics, which is an area that I love. So the course that I teach teaches students how to work with data. Some of these students have very little exposure to working with data prior to this class. We teach them how to do cloud computing. So we're working in Amazon Web Services, so they learn how to manage that infrastructure. But then that's all just how to get off the ground. The main point of the class is to help students learn how to use data to make better decisions. And there are some decisions that involve making predictions, and there are some problems that are about causation, what causes what. And depending on the type of, if you're in management in a firm and you're trying to make decisions, it's important to distinguish between those types of problems. Is it a prediction problem or is it a causality problem? And then what are the appropriate data you need and what are the right tools to kind of answer those questions. So it's just a super fun. It's a little bit of like computer science and economics and data science all blended together into one course. I think the students love it, and it's a very rewarding class to teach.
Now, David, what do you find most challenging about teaching students?
Well, AI is a huge challenge and an opportunity. It's something, I'm thinking about even this semester as we're about to launch is these tools have changed so fast that the ways we would teach and the skills that we were teaching them, many of those skills are becoming either irrelevant or just the nature of what does the human need to do and be good at is changing very rapidly. I mean, I'm grappling with those same questions myself. Even what does do you really need a professor in your life? And what's the point of going to class? Should we just send our robots to class? So I'm I find this to be just a very exciting time to be teaching, but I think it's also a challenge to keep students engaged when traditional methods of learning and evaluation, it's now very tempting to just plug those into a tool, spit out an answer, and kind of going beyond that to keeping a class relevant and informative and engaging is it's a challenge as much for me I think as for the students.
Now, I would imagine that before going for your PhD, if I were to suggest that you would become a business school professor, you would laugh me out of the room. But I wonder what has been the most surprising thing to you about being a business school professor?
Well, you know, that's a good question. I'm not sure that I'm terribly surprised by too much because I had no expectation about what it would be in the first place.
Mm.
I think that if I think back to when I was an undergrad, I think my idea of what business school was about is I thought, business school professors mostly were just there teaching students very practical, like how to, I don't know. I wasn't a business school student, so I actually don't even know. But I had this idea. It was like very practical skills just for kind of the how-to for business. I didn't realize that business school professors also we're able to engage in whole research agendas and have that and kind of the complementarities that come about because of that type of work. Something I see, especially here at Gies College of Business, is that there's different types of faculty that we have. I mean, we have faculty who spent their life working in industry and they teach in the classrooms and they tell students like, this is what this is what they say in the textbook, but here's what you really need to know. Here's how it actually works. And then you got faculty like me who have not spent our life in industry, but we've thought a lot about you know conceptual ideas and it's kind of a very different way of thinking about problems, and we teach as well. And I think what's really exciting, and I just didn't appreciate the mixture of types that you get in a business school, is that you have both of those types at the same time, and being exposed to both of them is a very valuable experience that it's hard to get in other types of college settings outside of a business school.
So, David, if you weren't a business school professor, what do you suppose you would have been?
Well, you know, I often think that it would be one of two things. Either I would be designing traffic systems. I've always found logistical problems and optimization to be fascinating, and traffic flow congestion. In fact, that's something that's been in the news recently with New York City imposing congestion
Oh,
pricing.
yes.
That's where
Oh.
traffic and economics kind of meet. Uh, and if it weren't that, I would love to just go and do pottery. Uh, that's the
I love that.
artist.
I love that. Do you do that as a sideline, as a
I
hobby?
used to. I used to do it before I had kids, and now
Ah,
kids are
right.
my main hobby, and it's perfectly fine. That's a hobby. I'll return to sitting at the potter wheel someday.
Well, I'm sure sculpting a child is a lot more difficult than sculpting a vase. So, if you had your way, the business school of the future would have much more of what? Would it be business analytics? Would it be more focus on healthcare, given the size that healthcare has in our economy? What would it be? Much more of what?
John, let me go back to something I mentioned before, but what do I want the business? I want the business school of the future. I'd like to have it do more of the thing that I like to do. Okay, that's a bit of a selfish, but hopefully this is actually the incentives are aligned that this is actually a socially valuable thing, which is I think the business school of the future should be doing more collaborations with other organizations. Part of this is just that, I mean, historically, universities were the places where the most exciting work with some research was often being done. They had data. They have the most powerful computers. Even think about the University of Illinois. They have a national center for supercomputing applications that started with the development of one of the most powerful supercomputers in the world. Okay, that era has changed so dramatically. It's now corporations and other organizations that have the most exciting data. Think about Amazon, which is just running its own
Mm.
economy, has huge amounts of data. All the big tech firms have just incredible data that researchers now, if you think of data as being like data being the new oil, data being what's valuable, most of the most valuable data is sitting outside of universities and in private organizations. And then if you think about computing power as being what we do to crunch the numbers, all the big tech firms now have computing power that is orders of magnitude higher than what even the top universities have. So
Mhm.
it's no longer the case that universities have the comparative advantage of data or computing. I think what we do have which needs to be our focus going forward, is our ability for to just be able to think very freely, uh, have new ideas, engage with those ideas, but that has to happen in partnership with organizations that are on the front lines tackling problems. So I would love to see going forward more collaborations between business school faculty and organizations that are on the front lines.
David, it's been a real pleasure.
Thanks a lot, John.
All right, that's David Molitor. He's Associate Professor of Finance, Director of Gies Health Initiatives, and a Hewitt Fellow and Deloitte Scholar as well. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. It's part of a series, Meet the Faculty at the Gies College of Business. Look out for more episodes. This is John Byrne with Poets and Quants. Thanks for watching.